How would European Union fare in a war against Russia if the USA did not intervene? In this video, we'll be looking at how the two would stack up in terms of military power. We'll also look at some statistics about the European Union and Russia, and then get into our main topic. But first, let's have a look at some statistics. The population of Russia is 146 million people, while the population of the European Union is 447 million people. So EU has 3 times more people than Russia. But if we look at the land area, Russia has 17 million square kilometers, while EU has 4 million square kilometers, so 4 times smaller. If we were to look at the GDP, Russia is ranked number 11 with a GDP of $2 trillion, while the EU is ranked number 3 with a GDP of $18 trillion. So the EU has 9 times higher GDP than Russia. Now let's look at the military expenditure. Russia spends $62 billion on its military, which is around 6% of its GDP, while the EU member states combined spend $198 billion, which is around 1.4% of their total GDP. Now please take some time to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell icon. So now, we can carry on. Now $198 billion might sound like a lot, but keep in mind that this is spread out among 27 member states. So for example, if we look at Germany, they spend $54 billion or France $46 billion. But there are also countries that do not spend that much. For example, Malta spends $16 million and Lithuania $1.6 billion. So the average spending per capita is lower in the EU than in Russia. When it comes to active military personnel, Russia has 1 million active soldiers, compared to 558,000 in the EU. However, when it comes to the number of military vehicles and weapons, the EU definitely surpasses Russia. For example, the EU has 2,700 main battle tanks compared to 1,900 in Russia. When it comes to the Air Force, the EU has 2,200 fighter planes compared to 1,000 in Russia. And when it comes to the Navy, the EU has 160 ships compared to 60 in Russia. So now that we have a basic understanding of how the two would stack up in terms of statistics, let's get into the main part of the video. Can the EU deter Russia from potential aggression against its members without the help of the USA? Before we continue, I want to say that this is a very complicated topic and there are many different opinions on this. And since I am just one guy making a video on his own, this is just my opinion on this topic. Well, the European Union is composed of 27 member states, some of which are NATO members and some of which are not. But all of them are part of the European Union. Now, the reason why some of them are not NATO members is because NATO is a military alliance between sovereign nations that are committed to the North Atlantic Treaty and its principles. And not all European countries agree with all of its principles. For example, some countries such as Sweden and Finland have decided recently to join NATO. Now, if we were to look at the European Union as one single entity, then yes, the European Union could apply for NATO membership. However, this is not possible because the European Union is not a sovereign nation. It is an alliance between sovereign nations. Therefore, the European Union cannot declare war or make peace with another nation. Only its member states can. And as mentioned earlier, these member states are not aligned with each other when it comes to defense policy. However, the European Union does have a common security and defense policy, which was established by the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992. This policy aims to coordinate the defense efforts of EU member states and to develop a common defense identity. But keep in mind that this is just a policy and not a treaty like NATO. Therefore, member states are not obliged to participate in EU-led military operations. They can choose to do so, but only if they agree to it. For example, in 2003, the European Union led the international military intervention in Afghanistan. This mission was authorized by the United Nations Security Council and the North Atlantic Council. However, only 13 member states contributed to this mission. Some countries such as France and Germany did not contribute military personnel, but they did provide financial support. So even though there is a common defense policy, each country still decides what their role will be. One of the most important missions that the European Union has led was the EUFOR Althea in Bosnia and Herzegovina. This mission was launched in December 2004, and its goal was to help create a safe and secure environment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The mission was successful, and in June 2021, it was concluded after 16 years. A total of 29,000 military personnel from 26 countries participated in this mission. So from this, we can see that the European Union is capable of carrying out military operations. However, the question remains, could they carry out an entire war against Russia? Well, the answer to this question really depends on what kind of war we're talking about. Are we talking about a conventional war where armies fight against each other on battlefields? Or are we talking about a hybrid war where different types of warfare are used, such as cyber warfare, disinformation, and paramilitary tactics? If we're talking about a conventional war, then I think it's safe to say that the EU would not be able to win against Russia, even though the EU has more military vehicles and weapons than Russia. This would not be enough. Military strength is not just about the number of tanks and fighter jets you have. It's also about the training of your soldiers, the quality of your equipment, and your overall military doctrine. And in all of these areas, Russia has a significant advantage over the EU. For example, according to the Global Firepower Index, which takes all of these factors into account, Russia is ranked number 2 in the world when it comes to military strength, while the EU is ranked number 10. So in a conventional war, the EU would most likely lose against Russia. However, things become more complicated when we start talking about hybrid warfare. As mentioned earlier, hybrid warfare is a form of warfare that combines different types of military and non-military actions. And one of the most important aspects of hybrid warfare is the use of proxy forces. Proxy forces are groups that act on behalf of another group, usually a state. For example, in Ukraine, there are many groups that are said to be acting on behalf of Russia. These groups use a variety of tactics, including paramilitary tactics, cyber warfare, and disinformation. And one of the most important aspects of hybrid warfare is the use of civilian casualties. By causing civilian casualties, the perpetrators aim to create a negative public opinion towards the EU and its member states. This can then lead to political pressure on the EU to end its support for Ukraine. Now, if we're talking about a war like this, then it becomes much more complicated. One of the biggest challenges that the EU faces in this type of war is the fact that it is not a unified military entity. As mentioned earlier, each member state has its own military and defense policy, and this makes it difficult for the EU to mount a coordinated response to Russian aggression. Another challenge that the EU faces is the fact that many of its member states are dependent on Russian energy. This dependence makes it difficult for the EU to take strong measures against Russia, as this could risk cutting off the EU's access to Russian energy. Now, recently, the EU has been working on reducing its dependence on Russian energy. However, this process will take time, and it is not yet clear whether the EU will be able to completely end its dependence on Russian energy. So when it comes to a hybrid war, it is much more difficult to say whether the EU would be able to win against Russia. On the one hand, the EU has more military personnel and a larger economy than Russia. This means that the EU has more resources that it can devote to fighting the war. On the other hand, Russia has a stronger military and a more aggressive foreign policy. This means that Russia has the potential to cause significant damage to the EU. Some historical facts from wars before might help us understand this better. During World War II, Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939. This marked the beginning of World War II in Europe. Germany's plan was to quickly defeat Poland and then turn its attention to other European countries. However, the Polish army put up a strong defense and was able to hold off the Germans for several weeks. Eventually, however, Poland was defeated and occupied by Germany. The Soviet Union also invaded Poland on September 17, 1939, and they quickly took control of the eastern part of the country. So in this case, Poland was attacked by two powerful enemies. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, the Polish army managed to inflict heavy casualties on both the Germans and the Soviets. The Polish resistance was eventually crushed, but not before making a significant contribution to the defense of Europe. One lesson that can be learned from the Polish experience during World War II is that even a small country with a weak military can still make a significant contribution to the defense of Europe. Another lesson is that it is important to have a strong military alliance. Had Poland been part of a military alliance such as NATO, it is likely that its allies would have come to its defense. In conclusion, it can be said that the European Union does have the potential to defend itself against Russian aggression. However, this would require a significant commitment of resources and a willingness to take risks. Additionally, the EU would need to be willing to learn from past mistakes and make changes to its current policies. Only then would the EU be able to create a strong and secure Europe. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, please leave a comment below and tell me what I should make a video about next.